So Sony has been fighting the good fight against PC gamers over the last year or so, but they finally folded like a cheap dress suit on clearance at Walmart. It's Sunday, so let's get sensational. I'm Mike, and I'm back to talk about the gaming news. I didn't do a news video last week because there wasn't much news to talk about, to be honest, so I decided to do my channel's 6th anniversary live stream on Sunday instead, which will be linked above if you want to go Pondy replay. I don't know why I made that reference, and I don't even know if that really fits with what I was talking about. But anyway, I did cover a couple of small stories during that live stream, and I shared my opinions on the state of video game hardware in general. And speaking of hardware, Sony has had a bit of a rough time putting games on hardware outside of their own, specifically on PC. So Sony had been receiving some backlash for requiring a PSN account to play some of their PC games, even some single player ones. Aside from the obvious thing, which is people not wanting to make another account if they don't already have PSN, there are several regions where PSN is just not available, and when they first tried to roll out this requirement with Helldivers 2, they had already sold the game in some of those regions where PSN is not available, and ultimately they had to pull back on it. But eventually they did start requiring it later on releases like Ghost of Tsushima, and people continued to complain about it, but they were like, nah, we rolling with it anyway. Well, they finally given in and are now making account linking optional on their PC releases. So Sony announced that going forward, PSN account linking would be optional, and they've also removed the requirement for Spider-Man 2, Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, and God of War Ragnarok. So instead of it being a requirement for these games, they're just offering in-game bonuses for people who link their PSN accounts to the game. Sony also said they're working on more bonuses for people who link their PSN accounts with PC games in the future. Now, I mentioned before that I don't personally think it was a huge deal to sign up for an account to play the game on PC, as it's not anything new on PC, but I also live in a country that has PSN. It's stupid on Sony's part to limit the scope of where they can sell the game by doing the account linking requirement. So offering incentives and of course having trophy support is a better way of getting people to sign up instead of forcing them to, resulting in people just not buying the game. But maybe Sony's change in policy on this is a result of new leadership. So last year, Sony announced 2 new CEOs of Sony Interactive Entertainment, or SIE, after Jim Ryan retired. Hideaki Nishino was put in charge of hardware and tech, and Herman Hulst was put in charge of PlayStation Studios and would focus on developing and publishing first-party games. Well, Sony has announced that Nishino will now be the sole CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment, with Hulst remaining the CEO of their game studio business and will now report to Nishino. Hiroki Totoki has also been promoted from CFO to CEO of Sony, with Lin Tao taking his place as CFO. Obviously, with this just announced, we don't know if we'll see any major changes from Sony. I would assume since Nishino and Hulst are in similar roles that we probably won't see any major changes on PlayStation side, but Hiroki Totoki being in charge of Sony in general, we'll see what happens. Last year, he specifically called out Bungie about their development timelines, and then we saw Sony start to divide their team and move them to specific projects, so we'll see if there are any other major changes on the PlayStation brand as a result of this. Alright, we've hit that time of the week again to talk about layoffs, and this time it's from Ubisoft. So some of Ubisoft's recent releases, like Star Wars Outlaws, haven't brought in the money that they were hoping for, so as a result, they announced that they are laying off 185 employees across several studios around the world, and closing one of their England-based studios, Ubisoft Leamington. According to the Engadget article, they bought the studio back in 2017 from Activision, back when it was known as Freestyle Games. Most notably, they developed DJ Hero and Guitar Hero Live under Activision, and they've basically been used as a support studio by Ubisoft. Ubisoft did say they would support employees through the transition, but it's still rough right now in gaming and the tech industry in general when it comes to finding jobs. Also, Ubisoft and several other companies had a bunch of layoffs last year, so yeah, it's still rough right now out there for workers in the gaming industry. But the bad news isn't done just yet, as Warner Brothers Games just announced that Multiverses is shutting down. Again. But for good this time. So if you're not familiar with Multiverses, it's an online multiplayer fighting game with characters from Warner Brothers properties. It plays a lot like Smash Brothers, but with a live service element thrown in. They launched the game in beta back in 2022, and then they were like, we're taking it offline to work on the final release, which finally happened early last year, but I guess it hasn't been performing up to their expectations. So WB Games announced that Multiverses will shut down after their current season, Season 5, ends on May 30th. They stopped all cash transactions, and the game is being delisted on several platforms. For people that have the game, they are adding an offline mode where you can play solo or against AI, but all of the online functionality will stop on May 30th. Now, personally, I tried Multiverses and it was pretty fun, but I just never ended up going back to it. I think the combination of the live service element with the style of game that it was, basically Smash Brothers, Was it going to work out long term, in my opinion, but at least they're adding an offline mode. Now, they haven't said if they're doing any kind of refunds. I'm assuming they're not, but either way, it's RIP to Multiverses. All right, with the bad news out of the way, we're going to close out today with some news, not about Nintendo this time, but about the Xbox. So let's go ahead and talk about it. And our final story, or should I say stories. So Microsoft had the developer direct a couple of weeks ago, and Phil Spencer's been out doing interviews and talking about the Xbox business in general. And one of the interviews was with the YouTube channel Destin, and there were a couple of interesting things that came up. So we recently talked about Black Myth Wukong not being on Xbox, and the developers came out and said that they can't get the game to run on the Xbox Series S. And I mentioned some other cases of developers saying that the limitations of the Series S has caused them issues. So he was asked about if Xbox would try to get rid of the parity clause with the Series S, meaning that you don't have to get the game to run on both systems to release it on Xbox. Well, Phil Spencer gave his answer, which was basically, no, it's not going away. He mentions that it's in line with handhelds like the ROG Ally and Steam Deck, and games are more scalable nowadays, and having the cheaper console is a differentiator for Xbox. Which I actually do agree. The Series S stands out this generation, especially at the price point that it's at. It's nice to have a current gen system for around $300 that can run the latest games. One of the topics they talked about in this interview was their hardware overall. And Phil Spencer thinks that the next gen Xbox needs to be more innovative hardware-wise. He basically said the current Xbox is too similar to the PS5, and he feels like they need to differentiate somehow so people have more of a choice when it comes to buying their gaming hardware. Funny enough, that's one of the things I rambled about during my live stream last week, that the Xbox and PlayStation, they're just kind of boring. They're both basically the same thing when it comes to the hardware. So it would be great, in my opinion, if next generation, one of them takes a risk and does something a little bit different. Now, the last thing I want to touch on for Xbox is about the PS5, because we got another exclusive making its way to the PS5, and this one surprised me a little bit. Forza Horizon 5 is making its way to PS5 sometime in the spring. They didn't give an exact release date, but it's a bit surprising they're putting a racing game on a platform that has Gran Turismo, but Horizon really isn't a direct competitor to that game. The main Forza games are closer to Gran Turismo versus Horizon, which is more of an open world game and a little bit more laid back in styling. But either way, it looks like Microsoft is continuing their cross-platform strategy and hopefully doing something cool hardware-wise next generation. But let me know what you think in the comments below. What would you want from the next gen Xbox hardware-wise? Personally, I think them doing a handheld instead of the Series S would be really cool. But again, let me know what you think down below. And if you enjoyed this video, then make sure to tell a friend, tell a coworker, like, share, subscribe, and hit that bell notification button so you can be notified when I drop a video or a live stream. I always do at least 2 things at the same time. Peace.